Hi guys, it's me. I know you thought I was going to be out of town. Well, due to circumstances beyond my control, I wasn't able to leave this week. We'll go and spend 2 or 3 days with my mom in the new year and have Christmas with her then. But anyway, I decided since I was going to be here, I would go ahead and stream the Hebrews 7 Peak of the Week Bible study tonight so that everybody would get this. We'll include a video in tonight's stream, but I'm pre-recording this because there's so many scriptures and things I want to overlay, and in order for me to do that adequately, I can't teach and do all of that at the same time, so I'm pre-recording it this afternoon, but I will stream it tonight at 7 o'clock. Anyway, glad you're here. Tonight we'll be in Hebrews, the 7th chapter, and we're going to be talking about Melchizedek. Now, chapter 5 and chapter 6 was almost a scolding that the writer gave to these Hebrews who were considering going back to Judaism. He actually says he would like to discuss with them some deeper things, but he can't because of their immaturity. So if you remember chapter 5, and I believe it's verses 8 to verse 13, if I'm not mistaken. Verses 8 to verse 13, it says, although he was a son, speaking of Christ, he learned obedience through what he suffered. And being made perfect, he became the source of eternal salvation to all who obey him, being designated by God a high priest after the order of Melchizedek. About this, we have much to say, and it is hard to explain, since you have become dull of hearing. For though by this time you ought to be teachers, you need someone to teach you again the basic principles of the oracles of God. You need milk, not solid food. For everyone who lives on milk is unskilled in the word of righteousness, since he is a child. But solid food is for the mature, for those who have their powers of discernment trained by constant practice to distinguish good from evil. Now, by the time that the writer gets to chapter 7, the writer's ready to force-feed these faltering Christians concerning the Melchizedek priesthood. Now, first, let me get you a little background on this priesthood, this Melchizedek priesthood. Hebrews chapter 7 and verse 1 says, for this Melchizedek, king of Salem, priest of the Most High God, who met Abraham returning from the slaughter of the kings and blessed him, to whom also Abraham gave a 10th part of all, being translated king of righteousness, then also king of Salem, meaning king of peace. Now, Melchizedek is only mentioned twice in the Old Testament. The first account of that is in Genesis, the 14th chapter, verses 1 through 24. Now, that's when Abraham was still called Abram, and Lot had been taken captive by a number of kings who were battling a number of other kings, and these kings actually plundered Sodom and Gomorrah, and Lot was actually living in Sodom, and they took him as a captive as well as his family. Now, Abram heard about this, and he actually took 318 men and attacked those kings who had taken Lot and his family hostage. He recovered Lot. He recovered all his possessions, his people, and even a substantial plunder. Now, what follows is the exchange that took place between Abram and this priest called Melchizedek. Beginning at verse 17, it says, after his return from the defeat of Chedorlaomer and the kings who were with him, the king of Sodom went out to meet him at the valley of Shavah, that is, the king's valley. And Melchizedek, king of Salem, brought out bread and wine. He was a priest of God Most High. And he blessed him and said, blessed be Abram by God Most High, possessor of heaven and earth. And blessed be God Most High, who has delivered your enemies into your hand. And Abram gave him 1/10 of everything. Now, our first meeting of Melchizedek is very brief, but it's very concise. The second occurrence of Melchizedek is found in Psalms 110 and verse 4. Now, that passage reads like this. The Lord has sworn and will not change his mind. You are a priest forever after the order of Melchizedek. Now that passage is repeated 3 times within the book of Hebrews. As a matter of fact, Melchizedek only appears 8 times in the New Testament. All are in Hebrews chapter 5 and chapter 7. Now the exact phrase from Psalms 110 and verse 4 appears 3 times within the pages of Hebrews. Chapter 5, 6, 6:20, and 7:17. So, all in all, Melchizedek is mentioned only twice in the Old Testament and 8 times in the New Testament, all of which are in the book of Hebrews. Now, as to his name, it means King of Salem, and Salem actually means Jerusalem. Psalm 76 and verse 2, in Salem also is his tabernacle and his dwelling place in Zion. Salem is also akin to the word Shalom, which means peace. So the Hebrew writer bears this out in verse 2. He says, King of Jerusalem, King of righteousness, King of peace. Now that points to something significant, that this Melchizedek then is most likely an antitype. Now an antitype is simply a person or a thing that is foreshadowed or represented by a type or symbol, especially a character or an event in the New Testament prefigured in the Old Testament. For instance, Peter actually would use this in reference to baptism. In 1 Peter 3, verse 20 and verse 21, he says, which sometimes were disobedient, when once the long-suffering of God waited in the days of Noah while the ark was preparing, wherein few, that is 8 souls, were saved by water. The like figure whereunto even baptism doth also now save us, not the putting away of the filth of the flesh, but the answer of a good conscience toward God by the resurrection of Jesus Christ. Now, the term like figure that's actually translated that way in the King James Version of the Bible is the Greek word antipon. It actually corresponds to an antitype, that something that is representative, counterpart, a like figure. Darby actually translates it, whereunto baptism being of the like form now saves you also. The English Majority Text Version puts it like this, which as an antitype, baptism now also saves us. That's not just in the English Majority Text Version, it's also in the New King James Version of the Bible and Young's literal translation of the Bible. What's your point? Well, my point is Melchizedek was an antitype of Christ. Jesus is the King of New Jerusalem. He is the King of righteousness, and he is the King of peace. Now, verse 3 actually sort of appeals to the Indiana Jones types. It says, without father, without mother, without genealogy, having neither beginning of days nor end of life, but made like the Son of God, remains a priest continually. Now, people see that no father, no mother, no beginning of days, no ending of days. Well, there's only 3 possibilities here. 1, Melchizedek was a created being. 2, Melchizedek was angelic. Or 3, Melchizedek was without lineage, unlike the Levitical priesthood. So, was he a created being? Well, there's nothing in the text here or anywhere else that suggests that. Was he angelic then? Well, the whole point of the priesthood was the commonality that the individual had with mortals. Verse 17 says, wherefore in all things it behooved him to be made like unto his brethren, speaking of Christ, that he might be a merciful and faithful high priest in things pertaining to God, to make reconciliation for the sins of the people. Basically, I'm convinced that what it's actually saying is that Melchizedek his priesthood wasn't based on a lineage. It was most likely, the Hebrew writer is pointing to the fact that Melchizedek is without a genealogy to fall back on, like Aaron and the Levitical priesthood. In verse 3, it says, without father, without mother, without genealogy, having neither beginning of days nor end of life, but was made like the Son of God and remains a priest continually. So what does that actually mean? before Abraham became Abraham, while he was still Abram. Before Isaac was born, Jacob, Levi, and the setting up of the Levitical priesthood, God set up a priesthood through this man called Melchizedek. Now, the Melchizedekian priesthood was set up before the Levitical priesthood and therefore was superior to the Levitical priesthood. And the next verses actually bear that out. Beginning at verse 4, it says, "Now consider how great this man was, to whom even the patriarch Abraham gave a tenth of the spoils. And indeed, those who are of the sons of Levi, who receive the priesthood, have a commandment to receive tithes from people according to the law, that is, from their brethren, though they have come from the loins of Abraham. But he whose genealogy is not derived from them received tithes from Abraham and blessed him who had the promises. Now, beyond all contradiction, the lesser is blessed by the better. Here, mortal men receive tithes, but there he receives them, of whom it is witnessed that he lives. Even Levi, who receives tithes, pays tithes through Abraham, so to speak, for he was still in the loins of his father when Melchizedek met him. Therefore, if perfection were through the Levitical priesthood, for under it the people received the law, what further need was there that another priest should rise according to the order of Melchizedek and not be called according to the order of Aaron? Melchizedek was so great that Abraham gave him a tenth of all that he had. Now, think about it. Here's Abraham coming back from this victory over these kings, and he pays a tithe to Melchizedek, this Abram who would end up being the father of Israel. So this is a good spot to actually put in the video. So I want you to hold on here. We're going to have the video, and then I'll be back as soon as the video's over, and we'll close out the class.
Melchizedek is one of the most intriguing characters the Bible says very little about. He's only mentioned in 3 books of the Bible. He is briefly introduced in Genesis 14. He is introduced by way of Abram. God had told Abram to leave his country and kindred and go to a land he would show him, promising to make him a great nation, bless him, make his name great, bless those who bless him, and curse those who may curse him. Abram was 75 years old when he left Haran with his wife Sarai, his nephew Lot, and the wealth and souls they had amassed, and traveled to Shechem and Canaan. Then he pitched his tent to the east of Bethel. Because of the massive increase in both Abram and Lot's animals, the pair decided it was best to separate. After the separation, Lot relocated to Sodom. It wasn't long before Lot's location got him into trouble. Lot was caught in the crossfire between 5 Canaanite kings and 4 kings from the east. During their conquest of the 5 Canaanite kings, the eastern armies took spoils from the region, including Lot and his family. Word reached Abram that Lot had been captured, so he assembled his 318 trained men to go get his nephew back. With them, Abram pursued the armies all the way to Hobah, north of Damascus. And, indeed, he brought back his relative Lot and his goods, as well as the women and other people. Abram's daring military venture liberated far more than Lot and his family. It is here that Abram meets Melchizedek, king of Salem and a priest to God Most High. Genesis 14, verses 18 through 20. And Melchizedek, king of Salem, brought forth bread and wine, and he was the priest of the Most High God. And he blessed him, and said, Blessed be Abram of the Most High God, possessor of heaven and earth, and blessed be the Most High God, which hath delivered thine enemies into thy hand, and to give him tithes of all. Melchizedek means king of righteousness, and Salem means peace. The city of Jerusalem, for example, means city of peace. As a result, this person is also known as the King of Peace. The unusual thing about him is that he is both a king and a priest. Kings rule over the people, while priests serve as a conduit between the people and God. No Jew has ever held both offices. Melchizedek is mentioned in the Bible to explain Jesus' position to Christ's followers. Melchizedek is described in Genesis 14 as the king of Salem, later Jerusalem, and a priest of the Most High God. Abram recognized Melchizedek's priesthood by tithing his battle spoils, Genesis 14, verse 16. Surprisingly, this incident occurred prior to the establishment of the Aaronic line, part of the Levitical priesthood, which was to mediate between God and man under the Mosaic law. Melchizedek was not a priest of Israel because that nation did not yet exist. Abraham had no children. The Levites would not become a priestly tribe for another 4 centuries. The king priest also offered bread and wine, both of which were used in remembrance of Christ. This is why the author of Hebrews says Jesus was a priest and a king in the order of Melchizedek. Hebrews 5, verses 1 through 7. For every high priest taken from among men is ordained for men in things pertaining to God, that he may offer both gifts and sacrifices for sins, who can have compassion on the ignorant and on them that are out of the way, for that he himself is also compassed with infirmity. And by reason hereof he ought, as for the people, so also for himself, to offer for sins. And no man taketh this honor unto himself, but he that is called of God, as was Aaron. So also Christ is glorified, not himself to be made a high priest, but he that said unto him, Thou art my son, today I have begotten thee. As he saith also in another place, Thou art a priest forever after the order of Melchizedek, who in the days of his flesh, when he had offered up prayers and supplications with strong crying and tears unto him that was able to save him from death, and was heard in that he feared. Jesus is the true and eternal King of righteousness and peace, and he is the great high priest who bridged the gap between God and humanity. Melchizedek is a type of the Son of God. In a messianic psalm, Psalm 110, verse 4, David addresses the order of Melchizedek specifically after describing the victory and glory of the Messiah. David says, The Lord has sworn and will not change his mind. You are a priest forever, in the order of Melchizedek. Psalm 110, verse 4. In Hebrews 7, verse 17, the author of Hebrews refers to Christ and quotes this verse. So, Genesis provides context for Melchizedek's identity. Psalm 110 connects Melchizedek to the Messiah, and Hebrews chapters 5, 6, and 7 describe Jesus' supremacy as the great high priest, using Melchizedek's role as an illustration of Jesus' priesthood and kingship. Hebrews 7. This Melchizedek was a king of Salem and a priest of God Most High. He met Abraham returning from the defeat of the kings and blessed him, and Abraham gave him a tenth of everything. First, the name Melchizedek means king of righteousness. Then also, king of Salem means king of peace. Without father or mother, without genealogy, without beginning of days or end of life, resembling the Son of God, he remains a priest forever. Just think how great he was. Even the patriarch Abraham gave him a tenth of the plunder. Now the law requires the descendants of Levi who become priests to collect a tenth from the people, that is, from their fellow Israelites, even though they also are descended from Abraham. This man, however, did not trace his descent from Levi, yet he collected a tenth from Abraham and blessed him who had the promises. And without doubt, the lesser is blessed by the greater. In the one case, the tenth is collected by people who die, but in the other case, by him who is declared to be living. One might even say that Levi, who collects the tenth, paid the tenth through Abraham, because when Melchizedek met Abraham, Levi was still in the body of his ancestor. If perfection could have been attained through the Levitical priesthood, and indeed the law given to the people established that priesthood, why was there still need for another priest to come, one in the order of Melchizedek, not in the order of Aaron? For when the priesthood is changed, the law must be changed also. He of whom these things are said belonged to a different tribe, and no one from that tribe has ever served at the altar. For it is clear that our Lord descended from Judah, and in regard to that tribe, Moses said nothing about priests. And what we have said is even more clear if another priest like Melchizedek appears, One who has become a priest not on the basis of regulation as to his ancestry, but on the basis of the power of the indestructible life. For it is declared, "You are a priest forever in the order of Melchizedek." The former regulation is set aside because it was weak and useless, for the law made nothing perfect, and a better hope is introduced, by which we draw near to God. And it was not without an oath. Others became priests without any oath, but he became a priest with an oath when God said to him, "The Lord has sworn and will not change his mind. You are a priest forever." Because of this oath, Jesus has become the guarantor of a better covenant. Now there have been many of those priests, since death prevented them from continuing in office. But because Jesus lives forever, he has a permanent priesthood. Therefore, he is able to save completely those who come to God through him, because he always lives to intercede for them. Such a high priest truly meets our need, one who is holy, blameless, pure, set apart from sinners, exalted above the heavens. Unlike the other high priests, he does not need to offer sacrifices day after day, first for his own sins, and then for the sins of the people. He sacrificed for their sins once for all when he offered himself. For the law appoints as high priests men in all their weaknesses, but the oath, which came after the law, appointed the Son, who has been made perfect forever. Without father or mother, without genealogy, without beginning of days or end of life, resembling the Son of God, he remains a priest forever. In other words, Melchizedek appears in history with no record of a genealogy or ancestral line, no record of his birth, and no record of his death. The point is that Melchizedek appears to transcend earthly existence. This makes him a type of Christ, who truly transcends earthly existence as the eternal king-priest with no predecessor or successor in his high office. One implication of Jesus' priesthood in the order of Melchizedek is that the Mosaic law was insufficient to save. If perfection could have been attained through the Levitical priesthood, and indeed the law given to the people established that priesthood, why was there still need for another priest to come, one in the order of Melchizedek, not on the order of Aaron? For when the priesthood is changed, the law must be changed also. Hebrews 7, verse 11 through 12. Not only is Jesus the compassionate high priest, Hebrews 14, verses 14 through 16, but he is the king as well. Revelation 19, verse 16. Jesus will physically reign as king in Jerusalem. Psalm 110, verse 2. And his kingship will be everlasting. 2 Samuel 7, verse 13. Much like Melchizedek was both priest and king, Jesus is also both priest and king. He is the eternal mediator between God and man, and the final authority as reigning king, soon to return and establish his physical kingdom in the same city where Melchizedek was from, Jerusalem. The point is that Melchizedek is a prototype of Jesus, the true king of righteousness and peace. As the divine Son of God, he had no beginning of days, and as the resurrected Lord, he has no end. Like Melchizedek, Jesus is both a priest and a king. Such a dual role was unheard of in Israel, where the offices of priest and king were intentionally distinct. The Levitical priests didn't rule, and the king didn't perform priestly duties. Nevertheless, resembling the Son of God, Melchizedek is an Old Testament illustration of what Jesus Christ would be like. Jesus has a unique priesthood that, like the priesthood of Melchizedek, brings blessing and renews the spiritual strength of his people with the bread and wine of communion, so that we can live in spiritual victory. Not only is Jesus different from the Levitical priests, since he's both priest and king, but he's also superior to them. How so? Because he's a priest like Melchizedek. The author draws attention to the fact that Abraham paid a tithe to Melchizedek. The Levites also collected tithes. They received them from the people of Israel, Abraham's descendants. But without a doubt, the inferior is blessed by the superior. In other words, as great as Abraham was as the father of Israel, he was inferior to Melchizedek because Melchizedek blessed him. Abraham acknowledged his submission to Melchizedek and expressed his gratitude by giving him a tithe. And notice this, he didn't tithe to get a blessing. He tithed out of thankfulness for the blessing he received.
I hope you liked the video. I hope it explained things maybe a little bit better than I'm explaining them. But key in on verse 22. By so much more, Jesus has become a surety of a better covenant. You and I need to get this. We are part of a new covenant purchased with precious blood, the precious blood of Christ. The blood of bulls and the blood of goats can't take away sin, but the blood of Christ does. And the priesthood that Jesus is engaged in, not just when he came into this world, but forever, is a better priesthood than that of Levi, because it's under a better covenant. Anyway, I hope you've enjoyed the lesson tonight. We'll probably rehearse a lot of this when we come back at the beginning of the new year. But thanks for being here. If you have any questions you want addressed in this Peak of the Week class, just leave them in the comment section below, either in Facebook or on YouTube, and we'll get to them. Remember to keep all of those who are on our prayer list in your prayers, and have a safe week. Have a Merry Christmas, and God bless each one of you. We'll see you on Sunday. God bless.